Let's see, as Elk says, I was the commander for the Mississippi Valley Division for the last 4 years, so I picked up a lot of colloquialisms from Mississippi, and you'll hear me say all y'all, but I'm really from New York, and I say yous guys, so as I'm transitioning back here to the Northeast, I'm in between, so in my speech you might hear both, and you might get confused culturally from where I'm from. I'm from New York, but I'm stealing words from all over the place. It is really good to be here, and I know General Bostic wanted to be here and present to you this speech. But he's in the PACOM area. He's in the Pacific Ocean. He was just back from. He was just in Japan and Korea, and I guess I'm going to China the week after the next month. And again, all of that fits in where the president had been talking about in looking towards the Pacific for the next decade. And so we, the Corps of Engineers, are looking in that direction as well, and how we can help the PACOM commander get the missions accomplished that he needs to do in that area. And so that's where General Bostic is now. It was touch and go up until just a little while ago on whether I was going to make this as well. There's a requirement from the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Odierno, and he puts upon us really a sacred duty and really an honor to. He has a general officer go to Dover every time we have a mission bringing back some of our fallen soldiers. We call it a repatriation mission. And yesterday we brought back 5 of our soldiers that were killed in Afghanistan, and 2 Navy personnel who were killed in Oman. I think theirs was a helicopter accident. Ours soldiers were killed in IEDs and small arms fire. So I spent a good day, a good amount of time yesterday talking with the families. About 46 family members came to welcome their soldier back to American soil. So I was doing that yesterday, and there's another mission, 2 more soldiers coming in, killed in small arms fire. That mission should be about 0300. So the General Odierno has his general officers on tap to do that mission, and my week is this week. So at one point we're going to have Mr. Dalton give this speech, because frankly all our general officers are out of Washington except for me, and I'm here because of being on tap for this sacred mission that General Odierno has us looking at. But anyway. I'm really happy to be here, and certainly Chairman Dorman and Mr. Cruz, and I think someone told me General Strzok is out there, but I can't see beyond the lights, so you may be there. And ladies and gentlemen, it's certainly an honor to be with you today. In the Corps of Engineers, we've been a proud member of CII since the beginning, and we're really proud to continue our activities with the Institute's research committees. CII champions a number of concepts that were heavily used in the Corps of Engineers, such as best practices, lessons learned, risk assessment, benchmarking, metrics, front-end planning, partnering, all of the things that have been brought up by CII and by many of the team members of CII. We've picked up as part of the Corps of Engineers and made that part of not only of our lexicon, but also the way we do business. So we really treasure our relationship with CII and the things that we learn from one another. In the Corps of Engineers, we're used to doing big things in a big way, although certainly in this audience, many of the organizations that are here, you have larger organizations than the Corps of Engineers, and probably even bigger missions. In the Corps of Engineers, we have 37,000 civilians and soldiers delivering services to our customers both here in the United States and 90 countries worldwide. We're working to strengthen our nation's security by building and maintaining America's infrastructure, and by providing military facilities where our service members train, work, and live. At home, we are dredging America's waterways, our harbors, providing recreation opportunities at our campsites. We have about 370 million visitors to our recreation areas. We provide more recreational services than the Park Service, Forest Service, pick anybody else. We've got more visitors at our recreation campgrounds than any other federal agency. When we explain that to General Odierno and Secretary of the Army, he has a tough time understanding what the Corps of Engineers do, and then we go into an hour of explaining what we do and how we invite the American public to our facilities. We're also working to restore the nation's environment in the Everglades, the Louisiana coast, and many of our nation's major waterways, including, and some of the things we're also doing is cleaning up contaminated sites of hazardous, toxic, and radiological waste in our formerly used defense sites and also our FOOSRAP program. All of this has a direct tie to national security, which is the ultimate purpose of the Army, of which the Corps of Engineers is part of. The security of this country depends upon its economic strength, and economic strength depends on sound infrastructure. The United States has been a maritime nation now since pretty much the founding over 400 years ago. We look at President Jefferson in his first State of the Union address to Congress in 1801. He called agriculture, manufacturing, commerce, and navigation as the four pillars to prosperity for our country. He urged Congress to defend shipping trade to the maximum extent permitted under the Constitution. Our economy has long been dependent on global trade, and that trade has always required viable coastal ports. Maintenance and improvements of these ports is what first got the Army Corps of Engineers involved in water resources in 1824. As I go around the world, one of the questions I get from other armies is, why does America have its Army involved in water resources? And I've tracked back on it really started in, most of the engineers in this, in the start of our country were from other countries. The first engineering school was at West Point, and that was put up also by President Jefferson. And so as our country started moving out west, trying to figure out how to do its mapping and surveying, the only engineers they had were military engineers. As we started addressing the water issues between the harbors and the channels between states, and there was great arguments between the states on who owned those waterways, the nation turned to its engineers, and at that time the engineers were Army engineers. And so we got involved in water resources since 1824. And so as I explain that history to our allies and how the Army got involved in water resources, they begin to dawn that we are a relatively new country, less than 300 years old. And so as we work our way to the west, we used our Army engineers to make that happen. And we still have that mission today. It's rare for any of us to go through a single day in this maritime nation where we don't pull up something that says made in, oh, this says China. So as a maritime nation, we are involved with pulling a lot of exports and imports through our ports and harbors, and we have the honor of working those particular items. Likewise, our energy, agriculture, manufacturing sectors depend on inland waterways and deep draft harbors for the most cost-efficient access to the international market. U.S. deep draft ports carry over 95% of our overseas trade by weight, or 75% by value, and that ports move more than $1 trillion worth of cargo in a year. We are still one of the world's leading maritime nations. However, we can perhaps learn a few things from other countries and their commitment to maritime commerce as they continue to put funds into their infrastructure. As I've talked to many different folks, as we go through a global economic malaise, there's some countries that are continuing to put funds into their infrastructure. And I think as we come out of these global economic malaise, those that put funds into their infrastructure will gain more than those that have not. I think it's called winning in the turns, and certainly it's a business term, but it's also a NASCAR term as well. And I'm sure I can't see any NASCAR fans out there. Certainly, you win in the turns, and I think that's also from an infrastructure piece as well, and economic prosperity. So there's a lot of discussion going on in the Hill is how do we win in the turns during this global economic malaise. Part of our global involvement in the Corps of Engineers has been also with the international cooperation to promote navigation, and we've been a member of PIANC, which is this international Congress that I just mentioned. And we've been involved with them since 1902, and we're also active with Western Dredging Association and participate in meetings with the American Association of Ports Authorities, which include not just U.S. ports, but also maritime nations throughout the Western Hemisphere. The National Export Initiative seeks to increase exports through trade missions, export credits, financing, efforts to remove trade barriers, enforcing trade rules, and promoting international policies that will lead to balanced world growth. And we continue to work with the administration on those particular items. In fact, the Institute for Water Resources just completed a study which was ordered by Congress. They gave us 180 days to put this report together that looked at what the impacts are of post-Panamax vessels as they come through the Panama Canal. Certainly, the new locks that the Panamanian people are putting together is a mega project. Certainly, something that would qualify as a mega project. These a mega project, again, many of you guys in CII know, are those projects that have high costs, long duration, high risk, unique, complex, state-of-the-art construction practices. All of those would signify that it's a mega project, and certainly the Panama Canal is one of those. We've learned some of the mega project principles from the CII members, and we're also looking at some of the projects that we have, like Olmsted, like Folsom, like the work that we did in hurricane storm damage risk reduction. I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And so some of the things that we look about in putting together a team for a mega project is team members are selected based on their technical skills and their team building skills. Clear, unambiguous contracts with site conditions that are well understood and accurately characterized in a contract. Contract incentives appropriate for the performance objectives. Partnering or team building in which owners, users, contractors, stakeholders are brought together regularly and work to achieve mutually beneficial goals, objectives, and outcomes. Leadership at all levels are affected organizations accepting the reality that we must all succeed or fail together. As we've been doing these mega projects that I just mentioned, sometimes we forgot some of those principles and we're off track on them. And we've gone back to designate big projects in the Corps of Engineers mega projects, and we have James Dalton and our engineers and our project managers putting more emphasis on those large construction projects as we move them into completion. Certainly, as I just mentioned, the $14 billion that we put in New Orleans, the Hurricane Storm Damage Risk Reduction project. That really was a systemic look after what happened in Katrina. The chief of engineers at the time, General Strock, put together the Interagency Performance Evaluation Team, the IPET. They uncovered some sobering lessons. Pretty much the system that we put in place around New Orleans was really just a collection of projects. The maintenance on those particular projects was varied. The ground had subsided, but we hadn't really taken that into account. The most important lesson, though, is that we needed to take a systems approach and build it as a system. So as the Congress appropriated the $14 billion, the first challenge was to get and restore 200 miles of the levees around New Orleans to the pre-Katrina condition. A lot of our experts saying working in that area would have taken years to do, but we needed to get it in before the 2006 hurricane, which was hurricane season, which was 9 months away. And we were able to bring in a lot of resources to get it done in the 9 months, and we were able to make that happen. But again, that 9 months at 200 miles was not enough, and really the nation had made a commitment to that city that within 5 years we would be able to protect that city to a storm that would be able to withstand the 1% chance of happening again. We used to call it the 100-year storm. We now call it the 1% chance of happening, because folks, perhaps you have that as well. When you explain a 100-year storm, statistically, people think it happens every 100 years as opposed to a 25% chance in a 30-year piece. So the president and the nation made a commitment to those people down in New Orleans that we would have that in place in 5 years. It was quite a challenge to work in the atmosphere of intense media, congressional public scrutiny, an environment that there was low trust for the Corps of Engineers. We have done several things during that time that was looking to put that project into place, and one was a firm commitment from 2 different administrations and the quick congressional action to deliver $14.5 billion into the Corps of Engineers coffers to get that work done. So having a fully funded program rather than the incremental appropriations that we have in a normal Corps of Engineer project was absolutely key in being able to deliver that $10 billion worth of work in 5 years. Before we were able to award any of those contracts, we had to document the environmental impacts that were happening and caused by the construction going through the NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And fortunately, the administration allowed us to do abbreviated NEPA, which meant that we were able to write down, codify the impacts, but move the construction to mitigate those impacts to after we got the system in place, and we're working on that as well. We also used a lot of different contracting techniques that we hadn't used before on the civil side. We learned a lot about these contracts on the military mission side. And some of those is early contract involvement. These are contracts that allow the construction contractor early access to the work site to work with the designer so that be able to get construction earlier with an earlier knowledge of what the design would be. We also used best value source selection contracts, which allowed contractors to selected based on several factors other than just price, and so we're able to get the best value. We also used design build contracts that allowed project design and construction to proceed simultaneously. The Corps with its partners from the state of Louisiana, we've signed a number of project partnership agreements outlining agreed upon methods on how the projects would be funded and what roles each would take as a partner to get this work accomplished. The Corps of Engineers also signed agreements with the state of Louisiana so that we can extend the state's payment to a core share portion, their core share portion. Instead of bringing it up front with the federal dollars, we signed an agreement that they would be able to pay their portion of the project over a 30-year period. We also involved the public in the decision-making process, hosting more than 500 public meetings and engagements with the local governments around the city of New Orleans, pretty much the 5 parishes. We listened to the stakeholders, they provided their public comments, and we had changed and adjusted the designs as best we could. In addition, the Corps implemented a robust, independent external peer review, which many of you have heard and have been part of our IEPR process, so that we can take the hurricane storm damage risk reductions, lessons learned, and best practices and roll that back into our follow-on work. The system as it stands today is an excellent example of what can be done when we are resourced up front and are able to leverage the full strength of the organization. At one point or another, we had more than 9,000 Corps of Engineers employees working with us down in Louisiana. That's pretty much a third or a quarter of the Corps of Engineers was down in Louisiana helping us build this the $14.5 billion. We got it to the 1% chance of flooding within 5 years, and we were going to have, the requirement was to get it done by the 1st of June. We were not able to get it done by the 1st of June. We finished it on the 9th of, got it to that level on the 9th of September, mostly because many of you remember we had a flood last year, and a lot of my resources in the Mississippi Valley Division was working the floods on the Mississippi, where we had to open up the levee at Bird's Point, and then open up the other floodgates at Bonnie Carey and Morganza. So a lot of my resources moved from Louisiana to work those floods. We also have used the best practices that we've learned here from CII and other places and overseas, and getting our people ready and operating in strange lands. Certainly the experience that we've gained in civil works projects at home enabled us to put together field force engineering services, field force engineering organizations to help provide services, engineering services to the Department of Defense and other federal agencies that are supporting the military and catastrophic disaster relief throughout our nation, and we support other nations as well in emergency operations. History shows that engineering requirements in these missions are often overwhelming in the early stages of an operation, and again in the post-hostility phase as well. We, the Corps of Engineers, we use small teams of military and civilian specialists to bring Corps' technical engineering capabilities and expertise to the front with a minimum footprint. Obviously, as you bring folks into a combat area, you need to find a place to bed them down, to quarter them, feed them, and so you want to go in there with the smallest footprint as you can from an engineering perspective. And so we used a lot of reach-back capability. Our people deployed worldwide would be able to talk directly with experts here in the United States through our Huntsville office, Erdict office, and our deployed troops were able to link quickly in the subject matter experts, whether they were USACE, private industry, or academia. And this reach-back approach worked very, very well in both Afghanistan, Iraq, and as General Bostic was working in the PACOM area, in the Pacific Ocean area, he was talking about a lot of reach-back that we use throughout the command that we really don't recognize at the command level, because it's just culturally where people just call and use those reach-back techniques, so it works very, very well. I had the opportunity to work some of this capacity development when I commanded the Gulf Region Division in Iraq. I was General Casey's and General Petraeus's engineer in Iraq. And that was an interesting time working with engineers from a different culture. Starting well, actually in 2004, the Corps of Engineers went into Iraq, and since that time, as we moved out of Iraq, we finished up about 5,000 projects estimated at a value of $8.8 billion. Today, the government of Iraq and the United States enjoy a bilateral relationship built on mutual goals. All of our projects there in Iraq, whether we're providing equipment for Basra's Children's Hospital to benefit the people of Iraq, or constructing a C-130 airfield facility to reinforce Iraq's national security, contributed to Iraq being a sovereign nation and a strategic partner for the United States. In Afghanistan, we also have folks deployed there now. In Afghanistan, we built many of our facilities in country using, when we first went there, using Western styles and methods and materials, and we found that, of course, not to be a good method as we move forward in that particular area. A lot of the state-of-the-art facilities that we built there were hard to maintain from a group of engineers and citizens that had difficulty understanding our Western ways. And so we spent a lot of time bringing in Afghan engineers, training them on how we do business, understanding how they do construction, and I think that's worked a heck of a lot better than when we first went in there in 2004. One successful example in capacity building is we look at our area office at Herat in Afghanistan, where we recruited, trained, and employed 75 Afghan engineers over the last 2 years. We specialized training and leading to the countrywide recognition of a quality control management certificates, and we promoted over 10 of those Afghan engineers to senior positions in the 4 resident offices in Afghanistan. 8 of those engineers have transitioned from USACE Corps of Engineer employment to well-respected positions with our prime contractors in Afghanistan. Another 6 of those USACE employees, Afghan employees, resigned and started their own private companies, 4 of which have become USACE prime contractors. While we've been busy at home and overseas, we've also been trying to figure out how to deal with the shrinking stream of funding. The upfront funding that I talked about, what we had in New Orleans, where we were able to, the Congress was able to appropriate the $14 billion and let us go to work, that's kind of the exception and certainly not the rule. And as we go further, as we look further into the future, it's less and less likely that we'll be getting our projects fully funded. Many of you remember the debt ceiling debates of last summer, and we're now facing automatic cutbacks in both defense and domestic programs. This leaves us in a position where we have to provide less service for less funds, but still try and meet our essential missions in national defense and the infrastructure. On the defense side, our strategy for sustaining U.S. global leadership is to reshape a joint force that is smaller and leaner, but also more agile, flexible, ready, and more technologically advanced. And we call this the Army or the Department of Defense of 2020. And so we're trying to figure out how to build that force that we need in 2020 during these austere environment. On the civilian side, the President has already said that the overall funding for agencies like ours, on the civil side, is domestic funding, will be held constant for for at least 5 years. He said that last year. So the Corps of Engineers is going to be operating in a more complex, less certain, and resource-constrained environment. This will require a focused, system-based approach and more collaboration to deliver safe, quality engineering solutions on time, at and below cost. This means we'll have to identify projects that provide the greatest benefits and recommend to the President and to the Congress that those be funded to capacity, that we complete those projects so that they can start producing benefits. They can start producing benefits before we move to the next project. In the past, from the Corps of Engineers, we would try and spread the funding over many projects throughout the nation, and was not able, in many cases, to finish them in a rapid manner and turn them back over to the locals so that they can start producing those benefits. The decision now is let's put the declining resources on fewer projects, get them completed, and then move to the next. That's an interesting proposition that we're continuing to work, especially in this environment with no earmarks. As the Congress moved away from earmarks, we had gotten used to working with earmarks. And so there's a lot of policies and procedures that we're putting into place now to work in this non-earmark world. Again, more complex than it has been in the past. We're also looking at civil works transformation. You'll hear about that in many different venues. We're looking at budget transformation, which means evaluating potential for non-core entities to take on a greater portion of our water resource projects. What we have been doing in the past on civil works is not sustainable. We have about $90 billion worth of work that has been authorized by Congress, and we get about $1 billion a year on the construction side. So we've got to figure out a new way of getting the nation's water resources into place to provide the services that are needed. So we're beginning to look at public-private partnerships and how do we put structures together or have excuse me, or have others take over some of our operations and maintenance on our locks and dams or our recreation areas. Thank you. Recreation areas, and then figure out a funding stream to work that particular expenditure. So we're working with Congress and the administration on figuring out how to do that budget transformation piece. We're also looking at how to think about our projects not as a collection of projects, but systems thinking and systems investment. So you'll hear a lot of discussions about watershed approaches and how do we fund and prioritize projects in a watershed systems approach. Other things that we're learning, and we've learned from CII, and you guys are learning from us, is we're going to have, General Bosick is having his Senior Leaders Conference in August at Little Rock, and we're going to bring our emerging leaders. We have about 46 folks identified from around the world, designated as emerging leaders. We'll bring them to the Senior Leaders Conference a day early. We'll do a lot of training with them and then inculcate them into the senior leaders, where we'll mentor, protege them for the week, and then at the end of the week get a report back from those 46 on what they had learned during their shadowing of the senior leaders. I believe CII is looking at that approach as well, is how do we start building the engineers that are going to be the senior leaders as we move on to well, hopefully the back porch, an adult beverage, and a cigar. But wherever I go next is we need to make sure we have the senior leaders built behind us. So I'm really looking forward to that senior leader conference. So I see the future. We're going to continue to operate at a pretty high intensity in an environment of austerity. Certainly the Army's reorganization, Gulf Coast recovery, our mission in Afghanistan, and more. And last year was some of the highest volume floods in America, and this year if you look for where the Mississippi is, it's 50 feet lower than what it was in Cairo and in Vicksburg and in Memphis. And so we've went from one of the highest levels of waters in our rivers to one of the lowest. I think 1988 is the drought of record, and we're just a few feet from that drought of record. So it's certainly going to be a high tempo as we continue out into the future. Certainly we can expect our operations and maintenance load to increase, our rehab load on the Mississippi, rehabilitation on the Mississippi and the Missouri continues. With those two floods last year, the Congress appropriated $1.7 billion for us to rehab the facilities that had been damaged from those floods. We're also looking at the complex watershed approaches and how do we also handle our coastal infrastructure in this environment with sea level rise. Also our ecosystem restoration. Just a lot of work that's still out there, and we're really happy to be working in these particular areas. But how do you do it in an austere environment? We're still working on that. So more to come. I think I see my XO standing in the back there. That means I'm about done. So let me just end by saying I would ask for your prayers and your good thoughts and wishes for our armed forces, especially those that are in harm's way. I'd ask you also to keep in your prayers the Corps of Engineers civilians and Corps of Engineers soldiers that are also deployed, and particularly the civilians. We've had in the Corps of Engineers about 10,000 of our civilians have been in either Afghanistan or Iraq. 10,000 deployment. And I can't be more proud of our civilian employees going into combat operations. Many people ask me why, and certainly I've been trained. I've been a soldier now for 35 years. I've been trained to go into combat operations. Civilian employees coming in to work right alongside me had not. But to see these guys wearing a helmet and IBA, the ballistic armor, ballistic goggles, earplugs, everything that you need to go into combat operations. The civilian sitting right alongside me when I was the Gulf Region Division was wearing the exact same thing, only hadn't been trained as fully as I had. The only difference between him and I is I had a 9mm strapped on me and he or she did not. And I've had many conversations at the end of our ride, and they realized that, well, they didn't know how bad of a pistol shot I was, so they would have rode in another van if they knew my capabilities with that 9mm was mostly to scare people than for defense. So I'd ask you to keep those people in your prayers as well. So let me just end by saying thank you for being here today. CII is a very important organization. As we pull all of the different industries together, we learn from each other and how to put our engineering, our infrastructure together better, faster, cheaper, greener. And I think we all learn from each other. So a very, very good forum, and we're very proud to be part of CII. With that, I will end, and I think there's a couple of time for Q's and A's. So I think if we adjust the lights, I can see if somebody has their hand raised. All right, I understand that there's not a lot of questions here. You're an organizer. I'm looking for questions over here. He's got his plan now. Now I have a tendency to ask you questions if you don't ask me any. So we'll just leave that there. We'll answer this question and see if there's any others. Yes, sir.
So the decision to open levees on the Mississippi River last year was fairly controversial. Can you just run us through the process of how that decision was made?
Yes, thank you. I was the one that made that decision, and so it was an interesting time. And let me just say, in 1927, and again I have to go back to history. 1927, we had a flood in that part of the world that devastated the 7 states that are down there. After that 1927 flood, the government put together what we call the Mississippi River Tributaries Project, and we've been investing in building the levees and also the floodways down there since 1927. Our nation invested about $13 billion in that particular area to keep it from flooding. People think $13 billion, it is a lot of money, but if you look at how many floods it prevented, there was about $360 billion worth of damages that were prevented by those $13 billion. So it was a 34-to-1 exchange on that. The design was pretty edgy at the time. Before this project was put into effect, it was a levees only. And so we as a nation would just build our levees higher and higher and higher and higher and higher until they were overtopped, and then the damages were just phenomenal. So what a plan came up, it was called Room for the River. And so instead of bringing our levees up high, we'll just move the water laterally in different areas. In this case, in Missouri, it's Bird Point, and that was an explosively operated system The ones that we have down in Louisiana, there was 3 other floodways. Those are more mechanically operated systems. So when we had to operate that system, it's called Room for the River. I know I've had a lot of discussions with environmental guys, and they say that we don't have enough room for the river as for ecological protection. But this system has been designed for since 1927 for Room for the River. Now, getting to the discussion on when we had to operate it, there are certain gauge levels of when we're supposed to operate that levee. As the water gets up to a certain level at Cairo, you start loading your munitions into the manholes that we had placed. There was 37 manholes. Off of the manhole was a 1,000 foot of 6-inch pipe in 3 directions, and the explosive slurry mix that we put in there were basically 2 inert chemicals until we mixed them together and put them into those particular pipes. I thought we would not have to operate that system. As a matter of fact, the governor of Missouri sued us all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yeah, we don't want to get involved with that decision. And they passed it back. The decision then went into the White House, and you know, who's going to make that decision to operate the levee? And word came back is, yeah, we don't want to do that. We don't want to make that decision. And so in the operations plan, in the nation's plan, it's a technician, basically the commander of the Mississippi Valley Division. Basically, it's the president of the Mississippi River Commission, of which I was at that time, makes that decision. And it was tested by the Supreme Court and tested through the White House that the person making that decision would be the president of the Mississippi River Commission. When I went to bed on the night of 1 May, the forecast where it was going to get to 61.2, and I was supposed to start blowing it at 61. And so when I went to bed, I was not going to blow that 300 tons of explosives. But during that night, a small storm came over that particular area, and the forecast went from 61.2 to 63. And I thought I'd be able to hold 6 or 7 inches. I was not going to be able to hold back another 2 feet. And so we operated the Birds Point, New Madrid levee. You might have seen it on TV. We blew that up in the night, so there was one entrance, and then we had to blow 2 exits in the following days, and you saw those during the daytime. The media was very unhappy that I blew it at night. They wanted to see good visuals. I wanted to blow it as quickly as I could, so I told them I couldn't work that particular piece. We then went from there and opened up the other 2 floodways down in Louisiana. I've read lots of things prior to that. You know, when you're going to operate it, the operations plan. There's something different on reading a document and then standing next to a river that's running at 2.2 million cubic feet per second. The power of that is just huge. Most of the times you look at big rivers like the American River, the Sacramento, you know, they're running at 180, 100, 200 cubic feet per second. The Mississippi, right where the Ohio comes in, 2 million cubic feet per second. From an engineer's perspective, just figure out how you're going to hold back something like that was just so powerful. The noise is just unbelievable. And so I have this discussion with a lot of folks, you know, on levee safety. You know, we want to do this, we want to make a shortcut here, we want to do that, and my answer is, if you're standing next to something as powerful as a river running wild, you want it as slick as you can, you want to move it as rapidly as you can, you want to build it as strong and resilient as you can. So we're having a lot of discussions on levee safety in California and the Pacific Northwest, on levee safety standards and whether trees should be part of levee safety standards. And we're having a great, good argument out in the West. But I'll tell you, standing next to a levee when it's got 2 million cubic feet on it, yeah, you want to make sure you got it right. So we'll continue those discussions. Jen, I'm sorry.
Good morning, General. how do you assess where is the next potential real danger point? There's a lot of critical infrastructure. As you just discussed, you have extremely limited resources. And is there, do you work on, or is there a way to assess where could be the next New Orleans? What of our great amount of critical infrastructure is the most critical and really needs the dollars?
Thank you, Jan. That's a great question, and it's a flawed system on how we've done it. In the Corps of Engineers, with our infrastructure, we do asset management, and we try and rack and stack the different components inside a system. But that really doesn't give me what I'm looking at. I'm looking at when I'm looking at asset management is what components do I need to fix, but it doesn't look at it from a systems place. We then put together operational condition assessments, which again looks at the infrastructure that we have in the Corps of Engineers at a higher level, and we try and rack and stack those that are in the dam safety world. We call them DSATs, Dam Safety Assessment, I can't remember what the program, P. And we got DSAT dams 1 through 4. We have 20 of our dams, I think it's 20 or 25 of our dams are DSAT 1, mean that they're unreliable. And probably the worst dam that we have is Wolf Creek Dam, and we're putting a lot of resources into Wolf Creek Dam to try and buy those down. In fact, Wolf Creek Dam, we've taken the load down. We've drained a good portion of the water behind that dam so that we can do the work on that. But where's the next, that's not really effective for looking at the entire nation. We've got DSATs, we got dams, and we do have a levee safety review that's going on for our levees. The Corps of Engineers has about 11% of the levees across America. The other, the 88, 89, we don't do a real good look on those particular items. So, Jan, there's not a real good answer on where's the next one going to be and how we're going to work it from that perspective. But we're attempting as engineers, we're racking and stacking as best we can, coming up with new programs, at least from our infrastructure. Certainly, we're not looking at city or local municipalities' infrastructure.
Out of time.
I'm generally out of time. All right, I know a hook when I see one. Thank you all.